Jason is a self-professed fanboy who's been fortunate enough to parlay his fandoms into a nice side career as the leading voice in Hawaii's anime and manga community. Born and raised in Mililani, he's a graduate of Punahou School and the University of Hawaii at Manoa with a bachelor's degree in journalism. He's written columns and blogs about anime and manga for the Honolulu Star Bulletin and Honolulu Star Advertiser for the past 13 years, and is currently the primary blogger for Otaku Ohana, a blog covering anime, manga, and comic culture, quote, from a rock in the middle of the Pacific. Please welcome Jason Yado.
Thank you, Stephen. Yes, as he said, my name is Jason Yado, and I've been asked to talk a little bit about the rise, fall, and renewal of the U.S. manga industry, or as I like to think of it, how did this introverted blogger dork end up with a speaking gig at the Art Museum of all places? So first let me give you a little bit of background about myself. I've been reading manga since 1997, and as Stephen mentioned, I've been writing about anime and manga since 2003, first for the Honolulu Star Bulletin, and then for the Star Advertiser when the two papers merged in 2010. I'm also the author of The Rough Guide to Manga, a book about manga that was released worldwide in 2009. And, okay, so here's the thing. Let me show you how fast things work sometimes. Last Friday, I submitted my slides for this part of the presentation. On Monday, I got an email from the Star Advertiser webmaster to all the bloggers that are hosted on staradvertiser.com that said, oh hey, say your goodbyes, we're shutting down the blog soon. But the good news is I have had a plan B in place, and I'm going to be taking Otaku Ohana independent. So now you can read it on otakuohana.com. We just opened it up yesterday, and I will be continuing to blog from that platform in the future. So, a lot of my story blends in with the history of manga in the US. So, let's start with the domestic industry, what I'm calling PJ or pre-Jason, before I really got interested in manga between the late 1980s and early 1990s. Now, one of the things that you have to realize is that it piggybacked a lot on the comics boom at the time, because, during this particular point in time in history, comics were all about epic events. Superman died, and Batman got his back broken, and, Green Lantern went crazy, and all of that fun stuff. And that drew a lot of interest and a lot of people to comic book stores. And publishers were looking for ways to capitalize on that increased traffic. And so they looked to manga as a possible source for new comics and new stories. So most of the titles that they brought down were sci-fi or action titles. And two of the big titles are what I have on the slide there, Ghost in the Shell and Akira, which the animated adaptations were in theaters or whatever, but those were really popular. So of course, the manga that those two movies were based on also turned out to be really popular. Now, the thing you have to realize is that in Japan, manga mostly reads from right to left and back to front. So when they adapted these manga for American audiences at first, what they did was they did what we call flopping the art. So it reads more like a traditional, American book, right? Left to right and front to back. And sometimes they would also take these black and white panels and they would colorize them, and they would also release them in standard comic book size format, just to make it easier for American readers to adapt to the books of the time. And this was also around the time that two of the bigger manga publishers in the industry, Viz and Dark Horse, sort of started establishing themselves in the greater comics industry at large. And both of those publishers are still around today. We move along now to mainstream breakthrough, which was around the mid to late 90s. And this was when you saw the debut of three really, really huge franchises, Sailor Moon, Dragon Ball Z, and Pokemon. Now, those three cartoons, when they got on the air, they were like really popular, big on TV. People wanted to get more stories, and of course, with the manga versions, those totally obliged. I mean, you've already seen earlier in this presentation with Audra and Jamie both mentioning Sailor Moon as a major influence in their comic fandoms and whatnot. And you know, there's the staying power of those three particular franchises endures to this day, which of course you've probably no doubt seen when somebody playing Pokemon Go on their phone accidentally runs into you on the street chasing after some Dragonite or something like that. And basically, three publishers were really benefited from this craze. Viz, of course, had the rights to Dragon Ball Z. They brought out Dragon Ball Z and Pokemon. They brought that out. Mixed Entertainment held the rights to Sailor Moon, so a lot of people flocked to that. And then there was Dark Horse. They picked up a particular title called Oh My Goddess. Now that's the story of a college student who calls one night for a pizza and misdials the phone and actually instead gets the goddess helpline. And the conversation progresses and he ends up with the goddess for a girlfriend forever. Now, the thing about Oh My Goddess and Sailor Moon is that it's sort of something that courted the female market, and these are the kinds of titles that really appeal to that female market. Now, in a time when comics were largely considered to be a male-dominated market in the U.S., this was huge. I mean, this basically opened up the gates for a whole lot of possibilities. And it's also kind of related to how I started reading manga. You'll notice that one of the titles that I put up there is Meisou Nikoku by Rumiko Takahashi. Now, I was in college in the mid-90s, and a girl who was one of my good friends at UH at the time was reading this series, and she shared it with me once, and it's about a struggling college student who moves into a rundown apartment complex, and he meets a really cute landlord and some really quirky neighbors, and it's sort of a slice-of-life romantic comedy. And I borrowed a few volumes from her, and from then on, I was really impressed by the storytelling quality, and I just really wanted to get more of it, and that's where my manga reading fandom just really took off. So we move on now to the early to mid-2000s, and the one thing that Audra brought up earlier, which really sparked the boom in the manga industry, Tokyo Pop's 100% authentic manga movement. So here you have Mixed Entertainment, who brought out Sailor Moon. They decided to change their name to Tokyo Pop, and they also hit on a formula for success. Number one, bring the price point of manga to $9.99 per volume. And number two, expand beyond comic book distribution. For the longest time, all these companies are selling their stuff to comic book stores and whatnot. Tokyo Pop basically said, hey, let's try to get books to all the major bookstores, record stores, video stores, try to get it out everywhere you possibly can. And then also what they did was they left the sound effects untranslated and the art unflopped. So now you're reading it from right to left and back to front like the Japanese are. And basically this was brilliant because you save on production costs and whatever, and you can promote it as 100% authentic manga. And it was so successful that established publishers followed suit. Other publishers soon got into the game, and basically what you had was manga was really cheap and everywhere. It was like the early 90s comic boom all over again. At its peak, you could probably throw a rock in a manga section and hit like 10 to 15 new series every month or so. And because of this exposure, you had sort of an era of manga-inspired artists. You have the rise of original English manga, as Audra brought up earlier. And locally, you had groups like Manga Bento, a group of young anime and manga fans and artists. And I also actually met Audra and another of our panelists, Brady Evans, through that. And also the rise of Kawaii-Con, which Roy will be addressing in a bit. And then there was drawn and quartered and cel-shaded. Basically, this those two columns in the newspaper evolved out of chats that I often had with a coworker of mine, Roma Lin, whom I've since labeled as my tag team partner in fandom. In 2003, I joined her doing anime and manga reviews as part of a Sunday column about comics in the Star Bulletin called Drawn and Quartered. And in 2005, I started writing what I believe was the only weekly column about anime and manga in a major metropolitan daily newspaper, which was Cell Shaded. And that ran from 2005 to 2011. And based off of that, there we go. Based off of that, around 2007, I was approached to write the Rough Guide to Manga. Basically, one of the editors of Rough Guides saw the reviews that Roma and I had written online and asked if we would be interested in writing their guide to manga. She was kind of skittish, but I was like, sure, we may as well give it a shot. So it took 2 years to write and edit, and it was released in September 2009 worldwide, UK, US, a bunch of other international markets. And basically what it was a primer to the industry. It had history of manga, definitions of common terms that were used, and the processes of making manga and stuff like that. The centerpiece was something called the canon, which were 50 must-read series. I included like universal classics like Astro Boy, which we talked about earlier, and popular series of the time like Fruits Basket and Naruto, and some lesser-known series that were some of my personal favorites, like, Meisou Mikoku. And at the time, it included a snapshot of 19 North American publishers, 4 dead ones, and 3 on life support. Now, there were so that means that there were like at least 26 publishers that were concerned around the time that this book came out. And I thought it was a great book for the time, and the thing is, though, that right now, if you were to pick up that book, that entire section about North American publishers or whatever is horribly out of date. Because the market dove. It took a nosedive up in the late 2000s. It was basically too much of good and bad and bad thing. To show you how saturated the market got, for a while, we used to get giant envelopes from Tokyo Pop with review copies, stuffed full of at least 10 first volumes of new series, like almost like every month or 2 months or so. And quite frankly, Roma and I didn't have time to read them all. Most of them didn't even look that interesting. So basically what happened to them was a lot of them just ended up at that library table at Kawaii-Con where you show them your library card and they let you pick a free thing. So that's what happened. And the problem was that the most popular titles were concentrated among a few publishers in Japan. There are basically 4 publishers in Japan that churn out big hits fairly regularly. Shogakukan, Shueisha, Kodansha, and Square Enix. The first 2 own Viz, so all of their titles are going to Viz. Kodansha has its own US division, and it would license out only to a few other publishers, and Square Enix as well. So basically what you had were the rest left to fight it out over a bunch of scraps. It was a survival of the fittest. And then, after that, you had the slow death of print media retailers happening at this time. You saw Tower Records die. You saw Suncoast Sam Goody die. Borders was really the huge one that really took out a whole bunch of manga retailers, publishers, because when they went out of business, there were like so few outlets left. And the remaining booksellers that were still out there, like Barnes & Noble or whatever, they were cutting back on space too. So there was just not enough room to hold all of this stuff. And then, of course, there was the big elephant in the room, the rise of scanlations. Scanlations are manga that's scanned, fan-translated, and posted online. And this whole internet culture nowadays, it's basically been, why pay for something when you can just get it online for free? So people were just kind of impatient with the way traditional manga publishers were doing things. The whole licensing process, the whole translation process. So they just basically cut out the middleman and said, you know what, do it yourself is a whole lot faster. So that cut out a whole lot of income for these publishers. So that brings us to the digital print present. You have basically 9 traditional publishers left, which are Dark Horse, DMP, Drawn and Quarterly, Kodansha Comics, 7 Seas, Udon, Vertical, Viz, and Yen Press. And they're still putting out print editions, but they're mostly tailored to people who appreciate print media. I mean, prices have gone up. I mean, there are still some $9.99 volumes, but there are also stuff that's more expensive. But it's kind of appealing more to that people who appreciate the print aesthetic. You know, you have more deluxe editions, you have more omnibus editions where you have like 2 or 3 volumes in one volume. And then you also have publishers adopting more digital platforms. I mean, scanlations are still around. They probably aren't going to go away anytime soon, but they've been mitigated somewhat. I have a screenshot of the Viz Manga app up there, but you also have online sites like Comixology, Crunchyroll, and MangaBots who are, you know, officially licensing these things and making the manga available quicker than, you know, it would be on in media. You can also take more risks in digital because, you know, you don't have all that physical stuff to deal with. So basically what that means is, yes, there we go, we have the whole print editions go premium thing. And basically what you have is, you know, something for everyone. So I pretty much see the manga industry, you know, kind of in a good place right now, and we'll see what happens from there. So that's my part of the presentation, and thank you very much.